The first shift of the sun was still a long way off, painting the edges of the city sky a deep, inky blue. In a small, tidy apartment on the quiet side of town, a single light clicked on in the kitchen. Leo moved through the familiar dark without stumbling. He filled the kettle, the click of the switch sounding like a gunshot in the silent apartment. While he waited for it to boil, he stood at the counter, packing 2 lunch boxes. The first was a simple affair: a thick sandwich, an apple, a bag of chips, a chocolate bar for a little sweetness. The second lunchbox was smaller, brighter in color. He cut the crusts off the bread carefully, shaped the sandwich into a vague heart, added carrot sticks cut into perfect coins, a small container of yogurt, and a tiny note with a dinosaur sticker on it. The note said, in his blocky handwriting, "Have a roar someday. Love, Dad." The soft pad of small feet announced her. Chloe stood in the doorway, her dark hair a wild cloud around her sleepy face, clutching a worn stuffed giraffe by one long leg. "You're leaving?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Not for a little while, sunshine," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to calm the quiet of the room. "Come on, let's get you some cereal." He lifted her onto a chair at the small table, its surface covered in a cheerful plastic tablecloth dotted with cartoon planets. As she ate, he moved around the kitchen, washing the few dishes from the night before, wiping down the surfaces. His movements were economical, smooth. He was a man who had learned to conserve energy, both physical and emotional. 3 years. It still felt like yesterday and a lifetime ago. The sudden silence after the long, quiet illness. The way their home, once full of music and laughter, had become a hollow shell. Leo had been a different man then, his life revolving around keys of a different kind, the black and white keys of a piano. He had been a student, a real one, with talent that teachers called once in a generation. But grief and responsibility are a heavy composition, one he hadn't practiced for. The music in him didn't die. It just went quiet, buried under hospital bills and the overwhelming need to be a rock for his little girl. The piano scholarship was the first thing to go. Then the lessons. Finally, he'd sold the upright piano itself, the one he'd found at a thrift shop and restored with his own hands to pay the rent. The sound of it leaving on a mover's dolly was the loudest silence he'd ever heard. He got Chloe dressed, helping her with the tricky buttons on her cardigan. "Remember, Tia Maria picks you up from school today, okay? I'll be home after you're asleep, but I'll check on you." "I know," she said, rolling her eyes with a 6-year-old's exaggerated patience. "You always do." She was right. Every night, after his shift, he would creep into her room, straighten her covers, brush the hair from her forehead, and just watch her sleep for a moment. It was the best part of his day, that quiet proof that he was keeping it together, that his world was still safe. He walked her the 3 blocks to elementary school, her small hand warm in his. At the gate, she hugged his legs tightly. "Play something for me tonight?" she asked, looking up. He smiled, a real one that softened the tired lines around his eyes. Always. Their game. He would come home, and before he even took off his coat, he would sit on the edge of her bed in the dark and play a song for her on his knees, his fingers tapping out the melodies of Beethoven or Chopin, or sometimes silly songs from cartoons on the silent, imaginary keyboard. It was their secret concert dot after dropping her off. The day stretched before him, empty and long. He spent it doing the things that filled the hours: grocery shopping for the week, paying bills online, fixing the wobbly leg on Chloe's chair. He called the doctor's office to confirm her checkup. He did laundry, folding her tiny socks, which always seemed to multiply. In the quiet apartment, the absence of music was a presence itself. His fingers would sometimes tap out rhythms on the kitchen table, complex passages from memory, but he would stop himself, clenching his hand into a fist. It felt like visiting a ghost dot as evening fell. He made Chloe's dinner, left it covered on the stove with a note for his sister Maria, who would stay the night. He showered, put on his uniform stiff, dark blue trousers, and a matching shirt with a name tag that just said, Leo. He looked at himself in the mirror. A janitor. A dad. The two facts sat side by side. He was proud of both, but sometimes, in these quiet moments, he wondered where the other man, the one who spoke through music, had gone. He hadn't vanished. He was just waiting. The night bus carried him across the city, from the warm, messy life of his neighborhood to the sleek, glass and steel canyon of the business district. Ethelgerd Technologies Tower shone like a razor-sharp jewel. He used his key fob at the service entrance, the door buzzing open to a world of echoing concrete and the hum of industrial cleaners. He clocked in, nodding to the other members of the small night crew, mostly older men and women who appreciated the quiet as much as he did. His territory was the executive floors and the main atrium. He started high in the quiet, dark offices where the daytime bustle was just a memory. He emptied trash bins filled with the confetti of big ideas, crumpled Post-its, broken styrofoam coffee cups, drained energy drink cans. He wiped down desks, careful not to disturb the framed family photos, the fancy trinkets, the stacks of important-looking papers. He vacuumed the plush carpets, the roar of the machine a satisfying sound that required no thought. This was his meditation. The work was simple, honest, and it left his mind free to wander back to Chloe, to plan their weekend trip to the park, to wonder if she was eating her carrots. A few hours later, he rode the service elevator down to the grand atrium. It was the centerpiece of the building, all soaring glass walls and cool marble. Expensive, uncomfortable-looking designer chairs were arranged in clusters. Living walls of greenery vibrated under the soft glow of architectural lighting. And in the center of it all, on a low illuminated platform, sat the piano dot. It was a beautiful modern thing, all glossy black curves and chrome, like a sleeping panther. The company had bought it for fostering creativity and unexpected collaboration. As far as Leo could tell, in the year he'd worked there, its only function was as a very expensive coaster for forgotten coffee cups and sometimes, sadly, half-eaten sandwiches. He approached it as he did every night, not with longing, but with a sense of quiet duty. He used a special soft cloth to wipe the dust from its gleaming lid. He carefully picked up a discarded water bottle left on the bench. He ran his cloth over the keys, feeling their cool, smooth ivory under the fabric. A memory would flash, hot and bright, the feel of a practice room, the smell of old wood and ambition, the sheer physical joy of making a difficult passage sing. He would shut it down quickly, firmly. That was not his life anymore. This was his life. The cloth, the silence, the watchful care of the instrument, for people who didn't hear its song. He never touched the keys. Not once. It was a rule he had made for himself. To play would be to open a door he couldn't afford to keep open. The pain of stopping again would be too much. It was easier to be the ghost in the machine, the man who kept the stage clean for a performance that never happened. As he polished the last key, his radio crackled. It was the security guard, telling him about a spill in the third-floor break room. Leo placed his cloth in his cart, gave the piano one last look, and pushed his cart towards the elevator, his soft-soled shoes making no sound on the marble floor. The atrium returned to its perfect, silent, unlived-in state, the piano a lonely sculpture in a museum of ambition, holding its breath for someone who remembered its language. The atmosphere in the Ethelgerd Tower was always different during Innovation Week. Leo noticed it the moment he clocked in. The usual nighttime quiet was replaced by a buzz that lingered in the air like static. Colorful, half-finished posters about synergy and disruptive paradigms were taped to cubicle walls. Stray brainstorming notes, blockchain for coffee orders, littered the floors. The daytime employees, usually gone by 6, were often still here at 8 or 9, fueled by free pizza and a nervous energy to prove they were the most innovative of all. Leo kept to his routine. Empty, wipe, polish, vacuum. The spectacle of forced creativity was just another thing to clean up after. He worked around a group in the 4th-floor lounge who were building a wobbly tower out of spaghetti and marshmallows, their laughter loud and a little too sharp. He gave them a polite nod and moved on, invisible. Down in the atrium, the mess was more pronounced. Someone had used whiteboard markers on the glass walls, drawing chaotic flowcharts that were already smearing. There were empty plastic cups everywhere, and the usually pristine piano lid had a ghostly ring from a sweating cup. Leo sighed softly and got to work. He was meticulously cleaning the glass when he heard the laughter. A group of 5 or 6 young associates from the sales and marketing track spilled out of the elevator. They were the kind of group that existed in every office, confident, loud, dressed in expensive versions of casual clothes. They'd been working on a project together, and their presentation was the next day. The stress had curdled into a kind of giddy silliness. Their leader was a man in his late 20s. He had a smile that was always switched on, but it didn't always reach his eyes. He was the one who always had a clever remark, who could talk his way into or out of anything. Tonight, he was holding court. The deck is fine. It's perfect. What we need is a memorable hook. Something that makes old Ethelgerd herself sit up and say, "Wow!" One of the women in the group giggled. "How about we all wear matching jumpsuits?" "Not bold enough," the leader said, waving a hand. His gaze swept the atrium, looking for inspiration, and landed on Leo. Leo was on his knees by the piano bench, using a small brush to sweep crumbs from between the legs of the bench into a dustpan. He was the picture of focused, humble work. A slow, mischievous grin spread across the leader's face. He nudged the guy next to him. "Look, the maestro, preparing his instrument." The group turned. They saw a man in a janitor's uniform, carefully cleaning a magnificent piano he would never play. To them, in their bubble of caffeine and ambition, it was a funny picture, a contradiction. The leader, whose name was Jason, felt an idea click into place. It wasn't just a joke. It felt like a team-building exercise, a way to break the tension and create a story they'd laugh about for weeks. "Watch this," Jason murmured to his colleagues. He put on his most charming, collaborative smile and walked over. The others followed, a little flock of anticipation. Leo heard them approach. He knew the sound of dress shoes on marble. He finished his task, closed the dustpan, and stood up, turning to face them. He held his dustpan and brush neutrally, waiting. "Hey there," Jason said, his voice friendly and booming. "Busy night, huh?" "Yes, sir," Leo said, his voice low. "Lots to clean up after Innovation Week." "Tell me about it," Jason laughed, as if they were sharing a struggle. He gestured grandly to the piano. "Beautiful piece, isn't it? A shame it just sits here. You know, we're actually working on a project about sensory engagement in workspace design. How sound affects creativity." Leo just nodded. He had cleaned CEO offices. He knew a line of nonsense when he heard it. Jason pressed on. "We need some raw data. Real, authentic sound in the space. We were just wondering." He paused for effect, and Leo could feel the eyes of the whole group on him. "You're around this thing all the time. You must have an ear for it. Would you mind helping us out? Just play something. Anything. We need to observe the acoustic resonance in the atrium." The request hung in the air. The group behind Jason was utterly still, some biting their lips to stop from laughing. They saw the janitor's worn hands, the simple name tag, the quiet deference in his posture. They were waiting for the polite, flustered refusal. Asterisk, oh no, I couldn't. I don't play. Asterisk, that was the punchline. They would all have a good-natured chuckle. Jason would clap the guy on the shoulder and say, "Worth a shot." And they'd walk away, their inside joke cemented. Leo looked from Jason's expectant, smiling face to the eager, mocking eyes of the group. He saw it all with a stunning clarity. He wasn't a person to them in this moment. He was a prop in their game, a tool for their bonding. The piano was a prop. The beautiful, complex language of music was just a setup for their laugh. A hot spike of something anger, humiliation, a deep, old sadness shot through him. He thought of Chloe. He thought of her asking him to play their silent bedtime concerts. He thought of the years of silent sacrifice. Of the music locked away, not because it was gone, but because he had chosen to protect something more important. The anger cooled, hardened into something else, a calm, clear decision. This was not for them. This was for every silent night, for every sacrificed dream, for the daughter who believed her father could make music out of thin air. He would not give them their stumbling, awkward refusal. He would not play the fool. He looked directly at Jason. The chatter in the atrium had died down. Other late-night workers, sensing drama, had paused to watch. The scene had an audience now. Leo's voice, when he finally spoke, was still quiet, but it didn't waver. It was flat, devoid of the fluster they expected. "I can play," he said. A flicker of surprise crossed Jason's face. This wasn't in the script. Maybe the guy knew chopsticks. This could be even funnier. "Great. That's great. The team appreciates it," Jason said, recovering with a flourish of his hand toward the piano bench. Leo didn't move for a moment. He placed his dustpan and brushed neatly on his cleaning cart. He took off his work gloves, finger by finger, and laid them on the cart. The simple acts were deliberate, almost ritualistic. He walked to the piano. He didn't shuffle or hurry. He ran the tips of his fingers lightly along the edge of the closed lid, not as a janitor dusting, but as a musician greeting an old friend. He sat on the bench. It was different from the stool he'd had years ago, firmer. He adjusted it slightly, his movements economical and sure. He opened the fallboard, revealing the perfect, untouched row of keys, glowing under the soft lights. He stared at them. In his mind, he wasn't in a cold corporate atrium. He was in a practice room that smelled of dust and hope. He was at his own piano, the one he'd sold, with the chipped middle C. He was in his daughter's dark bedroom, playing the silent song on the blanket. The audience held its breath. The expecting snickers had died. The silence was now thick, heavy with something no one had planned for genuine anticipation. Jason shifted his weight, his confident smile feeling stiff on his face. Leo placed his hands on his lap. They were strong hands, with scars and calluses from work, but the fingers were long. He took a deep breath, a breath that seemed to draw in every quiet year, every lost note, every ounce of love for his child. He let it out slowly. Then he lifted his hands, and with a certainty that came from a place deeper than memory, he laid them on the keys, and he began to play. The first note was not a single sound, but a chord. It was low, soft, and seemed to bloom in the center of the atrium, hanging in the air like a question. It was so quiet that for a second, people wondered if they had imagined it. Then Leo's right hand began to move, picking out a simple, heartbreakingly beautiful melody. The notes were clear and pure, each one placed with a tenderness that made the air itself feel different. It was Chopin, the nocturne in C-sharp minor, but it wasn't just the notes being played. It was a story. The left hand joined in, a steady, rolling pattern like a deep, Quiet heartbeat beneath the Melodies' fragile song. The change in the room was instant and total. The young sales associate, who had been trying not to laugh, felt her smile freeze, then melt away completely. Her eyes, which had been bright with mischief, now grew wide, then soft. She wasn't hearing a joke anymore. She was hearing a feeling she knew, a late-night loneliness, a longing for something just out of reach. She forgot about Jason, about the presentation, about everything. She just listened. Jason himself stood rooted to the spot. The confident, clever expression was gone. In its place was a blank shock that slowly deepened into something like awe, and then into a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. This was no party trick. This was mastery. The man he had tried to make a fool of was speaking a language Jason didn't know, with an eloquence that made his own words feel cheap and hollow. He watched Leo's back, the shoulders that were usually slightly stooped from work, now straight and strong, moving with the music. He saw the focused intensity of the man's head, bowed slightly over the keys. This was no janitor playing a tune. This was an artist emerging from a long, deep sleep. The music flowed out, filling the cold, modern space with something warm and ancient. It was sorrow, but not a sharp, crying sorrow. It was the kind of sorrow that comes from love, from having had something beautiful and holding the memory of it. It was the sound of empty rooms at dusk, of photographs in a drawer, of a child's laughter echoing from another room. It was also, woven through the sadness, a thread of incredible hope, a stubborn, gentle insistence that beauty still mattered, that feeling this deeply was not a weakness, but a strength. A software engineer on the third-floor balcony, staying late to fix a bug, heard it. He stood up from his desk and walked to the railing, his code forgotten on the screen behind him. He leaned on the railing, closing his eyes. The music drifted up, and for the first time all week, the tight knot of stress in his shoulders began to loosen. He thought of his own father, who had played the violin, and how he hadn't called him in over a month. A security guard named Ray, making his rounds on the monitors, saw the crowd gathering on the atrium camera. He was about to radio down to break it up, thinking it was a prank or a fight. Then he turned up the feed's audio on his console. The tinny speaker on his desk couldn't do it justice, but it was enough. He heard the emotion in it. He sat back in his chair, the radio in his hand forgotten. He was a big man, a former Marine, and he felt an unexpected tightness in his throat. He thought of letters written home from far away, of the quiet pride and worry he heard in his mother's voice. Down in the atrium, the crowd had grown without a sound. People had come out of elevators, drawn from hallways and breakout rooms. No one spoke. No one took out their phone to record. It would have felt like a violation, like talking in church. They just stood, or sat slowly in the designer chairs, or leaned against the walls of plants. They were being given a gift they hadn't asked for, and some deep instinct told them to be still, to be respectful. Leo was gone. The man at the piano was someone else, or perhaps he was finally himself. He didn't see the marble floor or the glass walls. He saw the face of his wife, not at the end, but in the beginning, laughing at a bad joke in a cheap cafe, her eyes sparkling. He felt the weight of his newborn daughter in his arms for the first time, a terrifying and wonderful responsibility. He smelled the old wood and musty air of the practice rooms at the conservatory, the smell of a future he once owned. He felt the crushing fatigue of the last 3 years, the endless cycle of work and love and quiet grief. All of it went in the music. His left hand, strong from mopping and lifting, gave the piece a powerful, grounding depth. His right hand, whose fingers could gently fix his daughter's broken toy, drew out melodies of breathtaking fragility. The music swelled in places, not with loud anger, but with a powerful surge of feeling all the words he'd never said, all the songs he hadn't played. Then it would fall back to a whisper, a single lingering note that seemed to ask a silent question. He was playing for her, for the wife he missed every single day. He was playing for Chloe, a lullaby for all the dreams he hoped she would still have. He was playing for the man he used to be, not to mourn him, but to tell him he was still there. And in a way he couldn't have planned, he was playing for them. For the tired, ambitious, stressed, and lonely people in that room. He was giving voice to the things they kept locked up during their own workdays, their insecurities, their loves, their quiet struggles. One of the young women in Jason's group had tears streaming silently down her face. She made no move to wipe them away. The music had connected directly to a loss of her own, a breakup she'd been pretending hadn't hurt. It didn't make her sad. It made her feel understood, as if the music was saying, "I know. It's heavy. And it's okay." The final section of the nocturne arrived. The melody returned, even more poignant now, over a left hand that rippled like dark water. It was a farewell, but a loving one. The notes became softer, slower, like footsteps walking away into a mist. Then came the final, famous descending passage, a sigh of infinite regret and acceptance. The last chord hung in the air, a soft, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the marble and in the bones of everyone listening. Then, silence. A profound, total silence. The kind of silence that is fuller than any noise. Leo's hands lowered slowly to his lap. He kept his head bowed for a long moment, his shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. He was back in the atrium. He was the janitor again. The spell was broken, and a sudden, sharp worry cut through him. What had he just done? He had broken his own most important rule. He had opened the door and let the ghost out. Now he had to face the room. He turned slowly on the bench. What he saw was not what he expected. There was no laughter, no mockery, no awkward, pitying applause. The faces looking back at him were open, raw, and deeply moved. Some people were still wiping their eyes. Others just stared, as if seeing him, really seeing him, for the very first time. Jason was staring at the floor, his face pale. He looked up, met Leo's eyes for a brief second, and then looked away again, not with cruelty, but with what looked like shame and a deep, unsettling respect that no one knew what to do. Should they clap? It felt wrong, like applauding at the end of a prayer. Should they speak? No words seemed big enough. They just stood in the quiet aftermath. The beautiful, sad, hopeful echo of the music still ringing in their ears. And in the space between them stood a man who was suddenly and completely a mystery. The janitor was gone. In his place was a musician, a father, a widower, a man of profound depth. And they had asked him to play as a joke, that the silence stretched, fragile, and waiting for someone to break it. The silence in the atrium was a living thing. It wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything that had just poured out of the piano. People seemed frozen, afraid that a single clap or a clearing of a throat would shatter the delicate feeling in the air. They looked at the man on the piano bench, who now seemed smaller again, his shoulders rounding slightly, as if he was pulling an invisible coat around himself. The spell was broken, and the real world was rushing back in, but no one knew what the rules were anymore. Leo's own heart was beating hard against his ribs. The rush of playing, of being that person again, was fading fast, leaving behind a cold dread. He had done it for himself, for his wife, for Chloe, but now he had to face the crowd. He saw their stunned faces, their wet eyes. He saw Jason, the ringleader, looking at the floor like a scolded child. This wasn't relief he saw. It was something more complicated. It felt like he had just undressed in public, showing them a soul they never asked to see. A hot wave of embarrassment started to creep up his neck. What had he been thinking? He stood up from the bench. The simple movement, the soft scuff of his work shoes on the platform was incredibly loud. A few people flinched, as if startled from a dream. He didn't look at anyone. He walked the few steps to his cleaning cart, his movements stiff. He picked up his work gloves. He stared at them, the familiar, worn leather. This was his reality. The piano, the music, that was a ghost. This, the cart, the gloves, the silent, efficient work, this was his life. He had made a mistake. He was about to push his cart away, to disappear into a service corridor and let the awkwardness dissolve behind him, when a new sound cut through the quiet. Clap. It was a single, solid, deliberate clap. It came from above. Every head in the atrium snapped upward. On the second-floor balcony that overlooked the space, a woman stood at the railing. She was in her late 50s, dressed in a simple but elegant dark dress, as if she had never really left the office. Her hair was swept back in a severe style, but her face, usually a mask of sharp focus, was now utterly transformed. It was the CEO, Eleanor Ethelgard, the woman who had built this company from a garage startup into a tech giant. She was known for her brilliance, her ruthless focus, and a stare that could make vice presidents sweat. She was not a woman who was often seen in the atrium after hours, and she was certainly never seen crying, but that's exactly what she was doing. A single, clean track of a tear had traced its way down her cheek, gleaming in the cool light. She made no move to wipe it away. Her hands were on the railing, and after that first solitary clap, she brought them together again. Clap, then again. Clap. It was slow, measured, and powerful. Not the wild applause of a concert hall, but something deeper. A recognition dot, as if a switch had been flipped. The frozen crowd below began to move. One person started clapping, then another and another. It wasn't raucous or cheering. It was the same kind of steady, respectful applause, swelling to fill the space. The software engineer on the third floor joined in, his claps echoing. The security guard, Ray, watching from his desk, gave a firm, solemn nod at his monitor and clapped his big hands together once for himself. Leo stood by his cart, clutching his gloves, utterly bewildered. He looked up at the CEO, then at the faces around him. He saw no mockery now. He saw wonder. He saw gratitude. It was too much. He gave a small, awkward nod, a janitor's polite acknowledgement of thanks, and turned to go. Wait. The voice was clear and carried across the atrium without needing to shout. It was the CEO. The applause died down instantly. All eyes went from Leo to the balcony. Eleanor Ethelgard didn't shout. She simply turned and walked, with a quick, purposeful stride, toward the staircase. The click of her heels on the marble steps was the only sound. Everyone watched, holding their breath as she descended. She walked past the group of young associates, who shrank back slightly. She didn't even glance at Jason, whose face was now a portrait of pure, cold terror. His little joke had just attracted the attention of the most powerful person in the building. She walked directly up to Leo. She stopped, looking at him, really looking. She saw the tired eyes, the calloused hands, the simple blue uniform, and she saw past all of it. She saw the artist. She extended her hand. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was a bit thick, but it was firm. Leo, after a moment's hesitation, wiped his right hand quickly on his trousers and shook hers. Her grip was strong. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I hired that piano," she said, not letting go of his hand, her eyes locked on his. "I spent a ridiculous amount of money on it. The idea was to inspire creativity, to remind people that beauty and logic can share a space." She paused, and a faint, sad smile touched her lips. "For a year, it's been a very expensive piece of furniture. a place to put coffee cups. Tonight, you are the only person in this building who understood the assignment. Leo didn't know what to say. He just nodded again. She finally released his hand. What is your name? Leo, ma'am? Leo Vasquez. Leo, she repeated, as if committing it to memory. How long have you worked for us? A little over a year. On the night shift? And before that? She asked, her head tilted. The music. That isn't just a hobby. Leo felt the eyes of the entire atrium on him. He swallowed. I studied. A long time ago. At the conservatory. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The conservatory. It was one of the best music schools in the country, a world away from emptying trash bins. The CEO's eyes softened further. What happened? It was a deeply personal question, asked in front of dozens of people. But there was no pity in her voice, only a direct curiosity. Leo answered simply, the core truth he could share. Life happened, ma'am. I had a family to take care of. She held his gaze for a long moment, and he saw something in her eyes, not sympathy, but understanding. A recognition of hard choices. She gave a single, slow nod. Then she turned to face the room. Her CEO persona was back, but softened at the edges. This, she said, her voice now projecting to everyone, is what real innovation looks like. It's not just a buzzword on a poster. It's depth. It's humanity. It's bringing your whole self to what you do, even if, she glanced back at Leo, even if the world has you doing something else for a while. She turned back to Leo. My office. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. We'll talk. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. Before Leo could even process it, she gave him one last acknowledging look, then turned and walked back across the atrium, her heels clicking with finality. She got into the waiting elevator, and the doors closed, leaving a vacuum of silence behind her. The spell was truly broken now. The crowd began to stir, people whispering to each other, looking at Leo with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The story was already writing itself. The janitor who played like an angel and made the CEO cry. Jason finally moved. He stepped forward, his face pale and serious. He stopped in front of Leo. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I'm... The word sorry seemed too small, too cheap to say. He just shook his head, looked down, and said, That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Then he turned and walked quickly away. His friends following in a quiet, chastened group. Leo was left alone by his cart. The attention was still on him, but it felt different. It was a pressure. He needed to get out. He nodded to a few people who gave him tentative smiles, then pushed his cart toward the service elevator. The squeak of one wheel, the only familiar sound in a world that had just tilted on its axis. As the elevator doors closed, he leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. He wasn't thinking about the CEO's meeting. He wasn't thinking about the applause. He was thinking about the music. For the first time in years, he had let it out. And for the first time, he wondered if the silence he had built his life around was finally forever broken. The rest of Leo's shift passed in a blur. The familiar routines, wiping, sweeping, polishing, felt like he was moving through a dream. His mind was back in the atrium, trapped in the echo of the final chord. The surprised faces, the tears, the CEO's handshake. It felt like something that had happened to another man. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his daughter's face. He had played for her in his heart. That was the only part that felt real. He clocked out as the first gray light touched the windows. The bus ride home was quiet. He stared at his own reflection in the dark glass, a tired man in a blue uniform. Had that man really played Chopin in a room full of people just hours ago? It seemed impossible. He let himself into the quiet apartment. He went straight to Chloe's room, as he always did. She was a small lump under the Comets and Rockets duvet, one arm flung out, her stuffed giraffe on the floor. He picked it up, tucked it next to her, and smoothed her hair. In the deep quiet, he could still feel the vibration of the piano keys in his fingertips. "I played for you tonight, sunshine," he whispered. She sighed in her sleep and turned over. He slept fitfully for a few hours, his dreams a jumble of piano keys and staring faces. When his sister arrived to take Chloe to school, she gave him a long look. "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." "I'm fine, Maria. Just a strange night," he said, forcing a smile for Chloe. After they left, the apartment felt huge and silent. He looked at the clock. 10 a.m., the meeting. A knot of pure dread tightened in his stomach. What did she want? A performance? A thank you and a dismissal for causing a scene? He put on his one good pair of trousers and a clean, simple shirt. He didn't own a suit. Looking in the mirror, he saw a man caught between two worlds, dressed for neither. The walk back to the Ethelgerd Tower felt different in the daylight. He went in through the main doors this time, not the service entrance. The morning crowd of employees streamed past him, buzzing with energy. He got looks, double takes. Whispers trailed behind him like shadows. Asterisk, that's him. The janitor. Asterisk. He kept his eyes forward, his heart pounding. The receptionist on the top floor had been expecting him. "Mr. Vasquez? Go right in. Miss Ethelgerd is waiting." The office was nothing like he'd imagined. It wasn't a huge, cold corner office, but a spacious, light-filled room with books, real books, on the shelves. There were photographs, a younger Eleanor with an older couple, another with a dog on a beach. The CEO was sitting at a small round table by the window, not behind the big desk. She had 2 mugs of coffee already steaming. "Leo, please sit." Her tone was businesslike, but not unfriendly. He sat, perching on the edge of the chair. She slid a mug toward him. "Cream? Sugar?" "Black is fine, thank you, ma'am." She took a sip of her own coffee, studying him. "I've been thinking," she began, "about that piano, and about wasted potential. It's a terrible thing to see, whether it's in a machine or in a person." Leo stayed quiet, his hands wrapped around the warm mug. "I looked at your file. Your work is impeccable. Never late. Never a complaint. Your supervisor says you're the most reliable person on the team." She paused. "I also made a few calls. To the conservatory. Your old professor, a Dr. Vernet, he remembered you. He said you had, and I quote, a once-in-a-generation touch. He said your withdrawal was a great loss." Leo looked down at the dark pool of coffee. The words were like hearing a eulogy for a person he used to be. It was painful and sweet at the same time. "The world is full of people who are in the wrong place, Leo," she continued, her voice softer. "Sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance. I believe in putting talent where it belongs. It's good for the soul, and frankly, it's good for business." She leaned forward. "I'm not offering you a job as a concert pianist, but that atrium shouldn't be a museum. I want it to have a heartbeat. I'm creating a new position, resident cultural curator. Part-time days. Your job would be to care for that piano, to play it during lunch hours, to maybe start a small music series for employees, to bring some of that humanity into this glass box on a regular basis." Leo's head was spinning. Curator? It was a word for people with degrees, with galleries. "But my job," he managed to say. "The night shift. My daughter? I've spoken to facilities. You'll keep your full benefits, your seniority. The pay for the new role will be a significant increase. You can work 3 days a week here, in the light, and keep 2 nights if you want the extra, or we can adjust. We'll make it work with your childcare. She said it all with a finality that suggested it was already done. This company talks about innovation and well-being. Last night, you showed us what that actually looks like. I want you to help us remember. She was offering him a bridge, a way to bring the 2 broken halves of his life, the artist and the provider, together. It wasn't a return to the past. It was a new, strange, wonderful future. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Say yes, she said, a real smile touching her eyes. And then go play something. The piano looks lonely today. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The first Friday of the new arrangement felt like stepping onto another planet. Leo was in the atrium, but not with a cart. He wore his simple clothes, and he sat at the piano as the lunchtime crowd began to flow in. There was a murmur when people saw him. Some recognized him from the story that had, of course, spread like wildfire. Others just saw a man at the piano. He felt a wave of nerves so strong his hands trembled. He thought of Chloe. He thought of his wife. He placed his fingers on the keys. This time, he didn't play Chopin. He played something lighter, a gentle, flowing piece by Debussy. Clair de Lune. The sunlight streamed through the glass walls, catching the dust motes, and the music wrapped around the space like a soft blanket. People didn't stop and stare this time. They went about their lunch, but they moved more slowly. They talked in softer voices. Some sat on the edges of the planters, closing their eyes as they ate. A young woman with a baby in a carrier, visiting the office, swayed gently by the entrance. The music was no longer a shocking performance. It was becoming part of the building's breath. Jason, the young associate, walked through with a client. He heard the music, saw Leo, and paused. He didn't approach. He just gave a small, respectful nod, which Leo returned. The prank was gone, replaced by a quiet, shared understanding. At 3 o'clock, Leo's shift ended. He closed the piano lid, his heart full in a way he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the roaring triumph of a concert hall. It was a quiet, steady joy. He had a purpose that used his hands for more than cleaning. He could pick up Chloe from school today. He was there for the afternoon sun, for homework, for hearing about her day while it was still light out. That evening, after dinner, Chloe looked at him. "Papa, play for me for real?" He took her small hand and led her to the living room. There was no piano. He sat on the couch and patted the space next to him. "I have a new job," he said. "During the day, I get to play the big piano at work." Her eyes went as round as saucers. "For real? For people?" "For real. So now, our concerts here can be different." He held out his hands, palms up. "You tell me what to play, and I'll play it on you." She giggled, placing her small hands in his. He closed his eyes and began to gently tap a melody on the backs of her hands. From her wrist to her fingertips, a silly, bouncy tune. She shrieked with laughter. Later, after she was asleep, he stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. The silence in his apartment was different now. It wasn't the silence of something missing, of music locked away. It was a peaceful, waiting silence. The kind of silence that exists between songs, full of the echo of what was just played and the gentle anticipation of what is to come. He was still a father. He was still a man who knew about loss and hard work. But now, he was also a man who played the piano in the sunlight. The melody of his life hadn't ended all those years ago. It had just been waiting for the right moment to find its way into a new movement, one that was softer, wiser, and more beautiful than he could have ever imagined.